handsome Mydei will decimate your enemies with his merciless strife, and today I'm gonna tell you how to build him best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, what relics does our tough, merciless bread-baking king desire? Well, it's an interesting dilemma with him. You see, he has two primary options: 4-piece Scholar Lost in Erudition, and 4-piece Longevue's Disciple. You see, in an ideal world, you would use his ultimate to give him enough charge so that he can fire Godslayer Be God after he uses his ultimate, therefore benefiting from 4-piece Scholar's buff. However, you can't always guarantee that you'll be able to launch his enhanced skill after he uses his ultimate every time, and saving his ultimate would be a waste of energy, which is a damage loss. This therefore means that you're going to have about 33% uptime on average for Scholar's 4-piece set effect. Now, if you're using Sunday and can advance Mydei forward, buffing him before he uses his ultimate and enhanced skill, then you can fire off a stupidly powerful blast. Here are the stats of the 4-piece Scholar Mydei that I'm working with. Sunday has 136 speed, so with that, we can do the usual DPS Sunday DPS setup with him. And here's a Sunday enhanced Godslayer Be God. Just so you know, this Sunday's E0 while running an S5 past and future. Yep, 1.3 million damage. Tribby's on freaking Dance too. All of the supports are free-to-play friendly, so when you're able to take advantage of his set, it's stupidly good. Genuinely, the damage potential on this thing is insane. Okay, so the set seems great. Why not use it then? Especially because according to calculations with a fixed 33% uptime, Scholar is barely worse than Longevue's Disciple. Well, you see, my friend, it's all in the name of consistency. Consistency, and also the fact that you may already have excellent busted Longevue's pieces lying around. You see, there's a couple of factors here as to why this set cooks. First of all, Mydei scales really hard on HP. In fact, it checks out that his body looks real healthy because he himself is the highest HP character in Honkai Star Rail now, so he scales really hard on the stat. Longevue's providing him with 12% HP on its 2-piece is already more effective than Scholar's 8% crit rate. Okay, but why would the 4-piece be any better than Scholar's 4-piece? Like I said, consistency. The 2-piece is consistently better than Scholar's, with the 4-piece consistently applying to all of his gameplay, as opposed to only sometimes providing a large blast of damage. Also, Mydei is much like Fei Xiao when it comes to crit rate. Both would prefer to overcap as opposed to having a low supply, because a lot of their damage comes from large big hits. If your Godslayer Be God doesn't crit, then you lose a stupid amount of damage. Okay, Juice, that's very gamer and all, but when Scholar has more overall potential, how much does that actually matter? More importantly, is Longevue's actually clearing on par with Scholar? In terms of cycle comparisons between the two, well, in the MOC 12 in which I tested these shenanigans, versus the Kafka boss because she features an imaginary weakness, I got 3 cycles when using Scholar. This was literally only a Mydei turn away from being 2 cycles, and because the build I'm using could use about 300 more HP, 2 cycles should be easily attainable. So I did another run. And I actually did manage to get 2 cycles using 4-piece Erudition, and then I got 2 cycles in using Longevue's. I did 2 runs on Longevue's, and both got 2 cycles consistently. So it's like what I said, Scholar equals higher spontaneous potential at times, and Longevue's equals more consistency, but because Scholar's higher potential doesn't really save you any cycles, it just makes you clear a bit faster than Longevue's. I wouldn't go out of your way to completely farm up a new Scholar set if your Longevue set is already really good. For the record, I was using Mydei's best installed team of Mydei, Tribby, Sunday, and Lorcha for both tests. This was his build on 4-piece Longevue's on 137 speed, with Sunday having 136 speed for the sake of a DPS support DPS synergy. I would like to point out that this build is lower on crit rate, which is acceptable due to 4-piece Longevue's effects, and it has roughly about 400 more HP than the Scholar build. So what can we conclude? Well, you want to use whichever you have farmed better pieces on, simply put. Farm 4-piece Scholar if you want to absolutely maximize his potential, as the chance for him to do stupidly large nukes is there. Otherwise, if you already have amazing Longevue's pieces, you're good to go, because his insane HP scaling makes that 2-piece really worthwhile, with the 4-piece fitting the rather spontaneous, uncontrollable nature of his kit. As for his 2-piece String and Orb, it's much more simple. 2-piece Eidolons Arena actually calcs higher than Bone Collection Serene Demise. This is because of how much of Mydei damage output comes from his skill. Eidolons Arena with a well-timed 4-piece Scholar Godslayer Be God. Now that is a force of nature to be reckoned with. Otherwise, you can easily benefit from the nice crit stick that 2-piece Bone offers, because the 28% extra crit damage applies to the wearer as well. Also, this dude's HP scaling is stupidly high as we mentioned earlier, so it only ends up being 2% worse than Eidolons Arena. Though it's worth pointing out that there's technically some hidden crit value here, because Mydei's A6 is able to convert HP into crit rate, so Bone might be better for you if you're struggling to meet HP thresholds. Glomoff is kind of mid compared to the other two, but if you're speed tuning him with Sunday, you can tune your Mydei to be at 135 plus speed, so that he can take advantage of the first half of the 2p set effect. As for our Handsome King's main stats, simple. Go for either speed boots or HP percent boots if you're trying to run him at base speed, a crit damage percent body, an imaginary percent orb, and an HP percent string. You go for HP boots if you're running a base speed build, which I'll delve more into detail on later. Otherwise, you're most likely going to be running speed boots for the sake of turn order synergies of Sunday. An imaginary orb is a status quo, but yes, an HP percent one works as a fine placeholder, and he scales on HP, so naturally you aim for the HP percent rope. This man eats crit rate for breakfast because of his A6, and even more so if you use Sunday. You're most definitely going to want to build him around the crit damage body. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary here. As for our glorious, handsome, beautiful Mydei stat goals, simple. I'll go over speed separately. For now, I'm gonna go over the raw offensive stats you want. Go for 7,000 HP on speed boots, 8,500 HP on HP boots, 55 to 180 crit rate and damage in general, or 35 to 220 crit rate and damage with Sunday in the team. A good rule of thumb for substats. The more HP the better, because then you get more out of his A6's crit rate buff. This makes it way easier to stack a ton of crit damage on the guy. So with speed boots, which is going to be his most common setup if you use him with Sunday, you're going to want to go for 7,000 HP as your main threshold. If you can reach that, you're good to go. If you're running base speed to accommodate certain specific setups, which I'll run over why you would want to do that in a moment, then you'd want 8,500 HP, because you'd be running HP boots too. When he's in his Vendetta state, he literally takes the current amount of HP he has and times it by 1.5. So you're always going to have more than enough HP to cap out on his A6. 55 to 180 crit rate and damage before any buffs outside of his A6, which I am indeed applying because it's very relevant to his build goals, should serve you fine. You're able to be sloppier with his crit rate if you're running Longevous. Because of Sunday's talent providing crit rate and his ultimate giving a huge crit damage boost, you'd want even less crit rate on Mydei, and trade those stats for more crit damage instead, which works out to a neat balance of 35 to 220. Once again, even less crit rate is viable if you're on Longevous, but remember that overcapping crit rate on Mydei isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so Mydei's speed. You see, his best team upon his release is going to feature Sunday, a character that wants you to tune your DPS characters in a very specific way. You always want your DPS to be 1 point faster than your Sunday, so that you can have your damage dealer dish out some numbers, then be advanced forward to move again so that your DPS can deal more damage, but even better this time, because you'll be buffed by your support. Basic stuff. So if you're running him with Sunday, it's 135 speed on your Mydei, and 134 on Sunday. It's fine if you're off by like 1 or 2 points, as in 138 to 136, or 137 to 135, but it can't go beyond 139, because then you're too close to breaking ever speed thresholds. So 135 with flexibility. I should mention that at least once per battle, you're going to run into a turn order conundrum like this. Typically speaking, with the usual Sunday DPS speed setups, you want your DPS to move first, then your support, then your DPS. However, because entering the Vendetta state advances Mydei forward by 100%, for one turn instance, Mydei's going to move after Sunday. However, this only occurs once per battle, because once he enters the Vendetta state, he won't leave it unless he falls in battle, which shouldn't be a problem for our handsome Undying Warrior. Therefore, it's not worth building your speed uniquely to try solve this issue, because it's not a big deal and only happens once. Also, Sunday's skill buff lasts for 2 turns, so he'll still be buffed even if you opt to basic attack on Sunday for a skill point, but even with an E0S0 Sunday, you'll find that his teams are very skill point efficient. So I'd still use skill to advance Mydei forward. This is because then, you refresh the 2-turn buff. And that's relevant because Mydei will move at least twice afterwards. Once after the anti-synergy takes place, and another time when the synergy goes back to normal. TLDR, just keep the usual status quo when it comes to Sunday speed tuning. No need to employ anything overly fancy. Otherwise, if you're trying to run him with characters like Sparkle, or if you're running a Sparkle Sunday double advance core, you want to keep him at base speed. This is where those HP boots from earlier come in. Both Sunday and Sparkle in this team should be at 160 plus speed, with Sparkle always being at least 1 speed point faster than Sunday, so that they can consistently allow the handsome lad to act many times. Those are the 2 different speed thresholds that you'd want to meet for him, under those specific conditions. You do not run base speed on him, unless you're cooking a 160 speed Sunday or Sparkle setup. No, base speed Mydei and 160 speed Sunday with a regularly built Tribby in the team isn't that good, and I'll go over why that is later on. Relics-wise, you choose what has the best substats out of these, and what suits your personal agenda best. I do think that Scholar is worth farming for if your Longevous set is really garbage, but if you've already got a very good one, then it really isn't worth wasting your Trailblaze power on a fresh set for him. If you're meeting stat thresholds, go for Rudolent Arena. I'd especially recommend Rudolent if you're running 4-piece Scholar, Otherwise, Bone can help you out if you're struggling with crit rolls. It may end up actually being better for you in such a case, and allows for a sloppier build. Essentially, Eidolons allows for his max damage potential, but Bone lets you meet stat thresholds more easily. Go for whichever suits your personal needs. Scrumptious. Dare I say, even more scrumptious than some milk-imbued pomegranate juice, or some freshly kneaded bread. You know how to gear up our handsome king, so now it's time to turn to light cones. What'll his best choices be? Well, there's 4 main options that act as worthwhile contenders. This is because there are only so many destruction options that tend to HP scalers in specific. We'll go over them all now. His signature light cone, Flame of Blood, Blaze My Path, which features some artwork of him looking as handsome as ever, is obviously his best insult light cone because it was made for the guy. It offers him multiple excellent goodies, which I'm gonna pick apart right now. First off, 18% extra HP. We all know why this is good by this stage. Mydei is the HP scaler. The king of HP scalers, dare I say. 18% is no small amount. The incoming healing increase is handy because he has so much darn HP, so there's a lot of healing to be done, which then helps him consume even more HP, thus perpetuating the cycle. Because you'll always be consuming such large amounts of HP, it'll be very easy to get the full 60% damage dealt increase that this light cone's full passive offers. Seldom will you ever find your undying Mydei to quite literally only have a sliver of health left, unless you're dealing with some insane boss nuke, so you'll easily be able to make the most out of this cone. However, hypothetically, let's say that you pulled for Blade's light cone ages ago, and have long since benched him. If you're pulling for Mydei, then I'm 99% sure you're not going to be using Blade anymore, unless you think he's super epic and cool. So what if I told you that the light cone you pulled for Blade wasn't actually suddenly useless? That's right, you can take great advantage of Blade's light cone on Mydei. In fact, it's literally only 7% worse than his signature, so it'd actually be kind of redundant to pull for a signature if you already own this. Unless you want it for the cool art. Understandable. Have a nice Mydei. Hilarious. Sorry, anyways. First off, you get just as much HP from Blade's light cone as Mydei's, a clean 18%. The extra crit rate isn't a bad thing, since it lets you get away with building even less crit rate on him, which equals more room for crit damage. I'd quite literally opt for 35 to 220 setup on this light cone without Sunday in the team, and with him in the team, then 25 to 230 should be workable. You can go even lower in rate if you're using 4-piece Longevous on him. The second half of the passive also provides damage dealt increase. It's just 24% instead of a fully stackable 60% at S1. That's where the main disparity lies. Otherwise, despite this light cone being made for a totally different character, it's really not that much worse on Mydei. Save your Stellar Jades and go for E1 Mydei instead if you already have Blade's light cone. It's a fantastic alternative pick. A Secret Vow will have excellent uptime on Mydei. At S5, it can actually offer more damage dealt increase than his main signature light cone at S1. Because when you have the full passive up, that's a nifty 80% damage dealt increase. That's 20% more than his fully stacked signature light cone. At S1, you get 40% altogether from a Secret Vow. The main reason as to why it falls behind a signature is because that's simply how important HP stat sticks are on our Undying King. The 18% extra HP makes a big difference. You can expect to have about 50% uptime on the passive on average. This is because, while Mydei drains his own HP, half the time, your enemies are also going to be low on HP because of how much damage he deals. That's another aspect which separates this cone and his viable 5-star options. With that being said, amazing 4-star light cone. I highly recommend it if you don't have the means to access either of his 5-star options. Don't worry, our gracious king does not go without his free-to-play friendly picks. You know, that one really cool Sam light cone that previously didn't really have a use? Well hey, now it does. It's free from the Forgotten Hall store, and that also makes its superimpositions cost-free. Essentially, it offers you some self-heals after Mydei consumes over 25% of his max HP, which he does very regularly. If you don't realize it, it's most likely because you're using a healer like Luocho or Huohuo, who heal your teammates when they take actions. But he does absolutely consume a staggering amount of HP per turn, thus allowing him to take full advantage of his light cone. At S5, which is free for everybody to obtain, you can deal up to 50% more damage. That's 30% less than an S5 Secret Vow, and 10% less than a fully stacked signature light cone. The only flaw is that because this light cone has a 1-turn interval in which you're not receiving the cone's buffs, there's a turn in which you miss out on the damage dealt increase, which harms your damage output. Also, it'd suck really bad if you ended up landing a Godslayer Be God during this unbuffed period. So it's the worst performing out of his main light cones for this reason, but worthwhile if you're unable to procure his other choices. Do note that you want superimpositions for this light cone to perform, but because those are free and easy to obtain, that's not a super big deal. Other destruction cones don't really offer any special benefits for characters that consume their own HP, making them inferior choices in comparison to the 4 that I just analyzed. His signature is amazing, but honestly, if you have Blade's light cone, then the need for it is reduced significantly. Otherwise, it's excellently tailored to his kit. Okay, so teammates time. Our handsome King Mydei, being the fierce warrior that he is, serves as the team's main carry, so naturally, you're gonna want to build teams for him which focus on buffing him up to the fullest. Tribby is his absolute best partner in crime, or should I say partners? Whatever. You see, there's a couple reasons as to why that is. First off, she increases her own max HP by 9% based on the total max HP of all of her party members thanks to her A4. When you consider that Mr. HP himself is on the team, that's a big deal. So she herself benefits from Mydei presence a lot. There's of course the freaking 24% res pen that she provides to all allies, and the fact that she's able to increase the amount of damage that enemy targets take with her ultimate zone. She is, without question, this handsome man's best in self support. Her build in Mighty teams is extremely simple. 4-piece Poet, 2-piece Keel, base speed. It'll get the job done just fine. I ran S4 DDD on Tribby during all of my testing. You can use 2-piece Von Wank too if you want to get her ult up a little bit earlier. Of course, I know that's gonna annoy a lot of people because I'm sure that there's a chance that you skipped her for our glorious king. Or perhaps you just aren't interested in using her. No problem. There are viable alternatives for her slot in the team. One of these replacements would be the Remembrance MC. To double down on the cheapness factor, I'll use the free-to-play Mighty icon at S5 for the background footage here. RMC is good for the typical reasons that you would expect. Great crit damage buffing, which is especially relevant for Mydei, considering that he gives himself so much crit rate already, and can abuse sets such as 4-piece Longevous. There's of course the stupidly excellent true damage buff and her advanced forwards. So how do these advanced forwards fare with Sunday, you may ask? Well, with Remembrance MC on 150 speed, you'll find that you'll often be able to provide Mem's buff to him before Sunday gets to advance him forward again, which makes for a pretty smooth synergy. But Mem's charge gain is spontaneous, so you can't guarantee that every time. What I will say is that because Mighty teams are so insanely skill point efficient, you're able to use RMC's skill every turn instead of using normal attacks to build up slightly more charge than usual. That also allows you to ult more often on RMC, which once again equals more Mem charge. This was being tested with a freaking E0 S0 Sunday on an S5 past and future, by the way. If you're using a sustain like E0 Ho-Ho or Lingsha, then skill points may become more of a scarce resource. But with a skill point efficient healer like Luochu in the team, you're easily able to fodder them for energy, even with a skill point neutral support like E0 S0 Sunday in the team. So with an S1 Sunday, imagine how that skill point economy would thrive. Damage-wise, you're definitely gonna do a whole lot less damage than you would with Tribby, but Godslayer be God with true damage blasts are very powerful, and you'll still clear quite well. I'm fighting the Flame Reaver in the background here, the current hardest boss in Honkai Star Rail, who doesn't even feature an imaginary weakness, with support on cheap investment, while being on S5 Flames FR, and he was doing fine here. RMC should be built on 4-piece Eagle of Twilight line across all teams, with 150 speed on 2-piece Von Wank. Okay, now it's time to glaze Mr. Orderman. Mydei's back on his signature light cone, by the way. Even if Mydei isn't a Memo Sprite user, Sunday's a fantastic hypercarry buffer in general. He's able to lower Mydei crit rate requirements thanks to his talent, which provides a good amount of crit rate, and can boost up his crit damage by a stupid amount while also advancing his actions. I already mentioned earlier how once per battle, the usual speed synergy will be broken. But that's not really a big deal because it's only once per fight, and you'll still have Sunday's skill buffs active. He's absolutely brilliant for Mighty teams, and to be frank, there's not really any replacement that's on his level. This has all been about the 134 to 136 speed Sunday, 135 to 138 speed Mighty synergy, but how about using Mighty at base speed, so with HP boots, along with a Sunday at 160 speed? There's one main instance where you try this, in a team with Sparkle. Stay with me here, I'm cooking, I swear. Yes, Sparkle buffs attack, something that Mydei quite frankly doesn't even use a little bit. However, the goal here is that if you build your Sunday on 160 speed, and build Sparkle on 161 speed, your Sparkle will advance forward your king, he'll act, then Sunday will advance him forward again, he'll act, you get the idea. Plus, Sparkle buffs crit damage too, which is actually a very relevant buff for Mighty. The Sunday I'm using here is 161 speed, and Sparkle is 163 speed. Having 1 to 2 more speed than Sunday is actually relevant, so that she can advance Mighty forward first. It's a fun way that you can make your Sparkle relevant again, and it's actually a really solid non-Tribby setup for all you Tribby skippers out there. Sunday should be built on 4-piece Sacrardos with 2-piece Broken Keel here. Lushaka is useless here because Mydei has no use for attack percent buffs. Sparkle uses the same setup, just with 1 to 2 more speed points than Sunday in this particular team. To explain why Tribby 160 speed Sunday kinda sucks, it's because there's legitimately zero reason to run it over the typical 135 to 134 setup. It's all about action value. Cycles aren't based on a number of turns, they're based on action value. So if your Mighty has no speed, and your 160 speed Sunday advances him forward by 100%, he is advancing the king to the same point as himself. Mighty is now at the same point as Sunday, despite having no speed. So why is this useful for us to know? It is generally less effective than just running the 135 to 134 setup, given how this leads to more Mighty turns, and he still has 100% uptime on Sunday's buffs. He will also generate more charge for Godslayer Be God, since he is taking more actions, and thus draining more HP. So if you're using Tribi in the team, just stick with the usual 135, 134, 135 Sunday speed tune setup. It also goes without saying that using 160 speed Sparkle in place of Sunday in this specific setup would only worsen things. And finally, we have Rua Mei. You're mostly only using her if you don't have anyone else because of her universal buffs, such as Respen. Her break-related buffs aren't really going to do anything for the team. In fact, extending the break duration of enemies is bad, because you want them to be able to hit your Mydei, so you actually want to use her against non-imaginary weak enemies. You'll clear just fine with her. Her set doesn't really matter, just make sure that you're meeting her minimum 180% break effect requirement, and aim for about 134 to 140 speed. Her buffs are quite strong, which actually lend her to being quite a good support, and the easy skill point management of Mydei teams makes keeping her buff up very easy. In terms of healers, nobody is beating Luocha. Amazing skill point efficiency, his field allows Mydei to heal every time he moves, and he's the most convenient healer for him on the whole. There's not really much to add here. Build him with 150 speed on 4-piece Musketeer, with 2-piece Vombwank, Keel, or because Mydei's imaginary, 2-piece Penacony works too. Ho-Ho is a good viable alternative, because she'll also heal your teammates upon them acting, and she can restore energy with her ult. But the attack buffs are sadly wasted in this team. Skill point economy will be fine because of how inherently skill point friendly Mydei gameplay tends to be. Lingsha's a viable alternative too, but she's not providing the team with anything special. She's just a good team-wide healer is all. Bonus points if the enemies happen to have fire weaknesses. Gallagher is the free-to-play friendly healer option, and he's actually really good because of his AoE team heal after he uses his ult-enhanced basic attack, and the fact that he can mark an enemy so that hitting them restores teammate HP. Also, a fun little factoid I discovered during my testing, when dominated or just generally mind-controlled teammates hit Mydei, it does actually increase his charge stacks, which can unironically let you get in an extra hit. But I'd still cleanse your supports as soon as humanly possible, because that is way too inconsistent to rely on. And if you're using somebody like Sunday, you always want him readily available to carry out his core turn order synergy. Order mentioned? Anyways, it's not so bad if your healer gets dominated and happens to target Mydei, especially because the survivability is already so good. However, this applies to literally one fight in the entire game, because there's no other boss that can mind control your teammates other than Kafka as of now. Also, if you're using somebody like Ho-Ho who cleanses your teammates at the start of their turns, then you'll basically never encounter this in the first place. I just thought it was something interesting to share though, aka, your run isn't done for if a teammate gets dominated. So example teams include Mydemos, Tribi, Sunday, Sustain. This will be his absolute best installed team. Bonus points if you got a Luocha on hand. Mydei, Orderman, RMC, Sustain. Mydemos, Sparkle, Sunday, Sustain. Remember, +1 speed on Sparkle over Sunday here, with both above 160 speed, while Mydei runs base speed. The King, Sunday, Rame, a Sustain, with your Sustains being either Luocha, Ho-Ho, Lingsha, or Gallagher. Generally, you want to avoid supports that focus on boosting attacks such as Robin, Tingyan, and the like, because their buffs are completely wasted on this guy. He loves skill points, and there's absolutely no room in his stomach for attack or attack-related buffs, so those kinds of supports are just ineffective with him. Also, naturally, because he wants to get hit, avoid using preservation units with him. Preservations tend to get targeted a lot, which means they'd steal away Mydei's charge. Besides, shields literally prevent charge from stacking, so there is an extreme anti-synergy between Mydei and somebody like Aventurine or Japard. Great, now that you've kitted out our powerful warrior, it's time to learn the ins and outs of him. So, his basic attack will deal one simple imaginary strike. You're genuinely almost never going to see this move in action, so you can just ignore it. As for his skill, Mydemos will consume 50% of his HP and deal some imaginary blast damage. Once you reach 100 charge points, which he'll get from losing HP, he'll enter the Vendetta state. This is tied to his talent, which we'll run over soon. When in the Vendetta state, his skill will turn into Kingslayer Be King, an epic name befitting of an epic warrior. This will consume a fixed 35% of Mydei's current HP, and will deal imaginary blast damage. If you don't have enough HP, then he'll just use up what HP he has and be reduced down to 1 HP. However, whenever you get 150 charge points during his Vendetta state, he'll deal a really large amount of imaginary blast damage. You'd ideally time your buffs to boost this large nuke, but you can only control that so much. He auto-targets all abilities while in the Vendetta state, and he doesn't gain any charge points from using Godslayer Be God. Also, no, his charge generation does not slow down when he enters the Vendetta state. In the Vendetta state, he times his HP by 1.5, and his defense drops down to 0, so enemies will hit him harder. But his skill consumes a fixed 35% HP, therefore, having more HP does not slow down charge generation. The self HP boost increases his damage output and helps him cap out on his A6's crit rate buff, so it's a useful thing. As for Mydei's ultimate, he'll gain 20 charge points and self-heal, then deal a good amount of imaginary blast damage. He'll also taunt the enemies that he blast attacks for the next 2 turns, and will prioritize the key target enemy for the next Godslayer Be God attack, allowing you to have some control over where you fire it. Ideally, you'd have Godslayer Be God be cast after using this ultimate if you're running 4-piece Scholar, but you can't really time that most of the time, so just use your ult when you have access to it. As for Mydei talent, simple. This stores his charge system. He can have up to 200 points at once, and after he gains 100 charge points outside of the Vendetta state, he will then enter the Vendetta state. He gains a charge point for every 1% of HP he loses, whether that be for him consuming the HP, or through him getting hit by enemies. Or potentially even mind-control teammates, as we had discussed earlier. When he enters Vendetta, he restores some max HP, and advances himself forward by 100%. Don't worry, as this only throws off synergy with advanced forward support such as Sunday for 1 turn. He increases his max HP by 50% of his current max HP, and then drops his defense to 0. When he gets 150 or more charge during his Vendetta state, he will gain an extra turn and launch Godslayer Be God, a massive nuclear blast of an imaginary attack that serves as the largest portion of his overall damage output. If he gets killed during the Vendetta state, no he won't. Nuh-uh. He'll revive himself, like the undying warrior he is, and restore 50% of his max HP. He then clears his charge and exits the Vendetta state. His technique does a few nice things. In the overworld, you're able to run past enemies for 10 seconds without getting attacked, because his technique stuns them. If you enter battle with them, you'll deal some imaginary damage to all enemies, and Mydei will taunt all of the enemies for 1 turn. He'll then kick off battles with 50 charge points, meaning that in endgame modes, you'll be able to enter his Vendetta state quickly after starting a battle. As for Mydei's Ascension passives, simple. His A2 provides his Vendetta state 3 possible revives. Maybe after the 4th time the enemies decided to try his back, but yeah, there's a low chance you're gonna need to use up all 3 instances of this. As for his A4, he'll become immune to crowd control debuffs during his Vendetta state, so anything like freeze, domination, or anything of the sort simply won't take effect on him. He's too battle-hardened to be fettered by such foolish little tricks. As for his A6, this is what stores his HP to crit rate conversion. You can get a max of up to 48% crit rate for this passive, which makes crit damage an extremely valuable stat on him. This A6 also causes him to build up more charge from enemies attacking him, and his incoming healing is also increased through how much max HP he has. As for Mydei's trace priorities, simple, go for this. They are all important. Do not neglect any single aspect of his kit, but his main damage share lies in his skill, especially in his Godslayer Be God, so level that first. Then you'll level his ultimate, as it's a fairly strong ability which you'll be using regularly. Leveling his talent increases how much he heals himself upon entering the Vendetta state, every other scaling is fixed, so level it last. But don't completely neglect it. His basics, however, well, I think saying it's the most useless ability in all of Amphore's would be an understatement. Neglect it entirely. He's primarily made for MOC at E0 in my opinion. Blast attacks don't fare that well in Pure Fiction, and he doesn't do a whole lot of break damage, so he's not really designed for APOC in my opinion. He feels great in MOC, very strong, and all of his teams are able to manage the content well. He feels really powerful in content where his massive Godslayer nukes can shine, and since MOC is primarily a DPS check, that's where he looks his best. In PF, you can make him work if you bring somebody like Linksha as your sustain, or if you pair him with somebody that's generally good in Pure Fiction. He's not horrible in Pure Fiction at E0 by any means. I was able to get 40k points on PF3 and 27k points on PF4 while using Linksha in the team. PF3 did have fire weaknesses, PF4 didn't. However, on his own, he's just average at the game mode. My advice, you either run the usual Tribi combo for her personal damage and have a sustain like Linksha on the end, or you run Sparkle Sunday so that you can constantly provide your Mydei most of actions. If you want to use E0 Mydei in Pure Fiction 4, then you're gonna want a really strong second half team to make up for the points that he's behind on. Just stick to MOC with E0. As for APOC, well, you see, character effectiveness varies depending on which bosses are currently there. I put him up against the TV Monkey Squad because of the imaginary weaknesses which they featured. That boss really values being broken, and dealing high toughness damage isn't really Mydei's whole deal, as much as simply dealing the highest amount of damage possible is. So you'd think that he wouldn't be good here, right? Wrong, he's actually surprisingly really decent in APOC. Because that's just how much freaking damage this guy deals. When you're getting the TV monkeys to their vulnerable state, he won't do much, but he still did a shocking amount of damage to the monkeys while they still had their primary defenses up. But whenever you get to the boss's exploitable phase, he nukes them down easily. He cleared with 211 AV remaining. Reminder that all of his supports are on free-to-play friendly E0 S0 builds. Yep. So we can conclude that he's good for boss-centric game modes like APOC and MOC at E0, especially MOC, but you kind of want other good Pure Fiction units to help him out in Pure Fiction, or you'd want to pull for his E1, which would make him a lot better there. I'll discuss why that is soon, but generally, if you're lacking a good MOC carry who's also highly competent in APOC, look no further than the son of Gorgo himself. Mydei is a king, the king to end all kings. So if you wish to adorn him in wealth like he deserves, then let's talk Eidolons. This E1 makes him a whole lot better against enemies that summon a lot of targets, and makes him feel a lot better in pure fiction, because now, Godslayer be God will hit all enemies. The huge scaling increase to Godslayer is nothing to scoff at either. Insane E1 that makes him feel more versatile against a wider variety of enemies. Note that not only does this make him better in pure fiction, but if you take bosses like Nikador into account who want you to destroy all of their constructs to damage the primary boss, this E1 only gets better in value. Amazing Eidolon. This directly increases his damage output by having him ignore 15% of all enemy defense during his Vendetta state. I don't think you need me to tell you why that's good, and healing now provides him with additional charge, which equals way more Godslayer be God procs. Yeah, to say that this E2 is fantastic would be an understatement. Plus 2 to his skill is really nice because it affects his Godslayer be God scalings. The plus 1 to his basic is literally useless, my man. He'll gain an innate 30% crit damage boost during his Vendetta state, and he'll heal 10% of his max HP when enemies attack him, as if he wasn't undying enough already. A fine E4. Plus 2 to his talent and ultimate isn't that big of a deal, but the extra scalings to his ultimate is nice. This E6 will permanently fix Mydei into his Vendetta state, and Godslayer be God will only cost you 100 charge points now. This means that he's always going to be auto-attacking, so if you're a whale that enjoys high investment gameplay, consider whether that's something you'd actually be interested in first. Strength-wise, yeah dude, this is literally busted, no questions asked, not even a minuscule query. In terms of high stellar Jade-based investment, it depends. If you already have Blades like Cone, I'd go for his E1 because it turns Mydei into more of an all-rounder for your account. All game modes will be cakewalks for him, and he becomes more of an all-rounder in MOC as well, as he becomes more effective versus certain bosses, which is especially relevant when you consider how many bosses summon additional constructs next to them during battle. However, if you're starting off with a Secret Vow or Flames of Far, go for his signature Lycone first, because it's a more cost-effective increase. But if your Secret Vow is S5 and you have enough to guarantee E1, then once again, if you don't already have good pure fiction teammates, or competent checks for the more AoE-centric bosses, then his E1's really good for rounding out your account. I'd stop at E2 S1 max, because going over that is just kind of overkill. But yes, his E3 to 4 are good standalone Eidolons, but are kind of redundant because their performance increases aren't as large as E1 and E2. It's not a case of stop or go all the way to E6. A great Eidolon lineup on the whole though. Whoo boy, this guide certainly took me a while. If it wasn't already made abundantly clear at this point, Mydei is my favorite Honkai Star Rail character. Yep, that's right. Kafka has officially been dethroned as my Honkai Star Rail number 1. I've been a DOT main since day 1 of that woman's release, but now it's time to step down and become a main of our glorious king who is crowned in blood. I love this character to bits, and he's part of the reason as to why I'm back into Honkai Star Rail again, with the other part being Fengyun. I'm very fond of the guy, which is precisely why now I'm going to go back to saving fan art of him doing whatever shenanigans with Fengyun now. He's awesome, he's sweet, and there's no cost too great, no mortality to be afraid of, no flesh to break, no weaknesses which your enemies will exploit. Born of man and strife, you shall seal the blinding madness that infects the homeland. You are the king. You are strife. Hopefully this video is able to ascend your Mydei to demigod status. This has been Juice, signing out, and may triumph always be yours.